Hi guys, MrRoflWaffles here. Today we're going to be diving into the complete story of Outbreak, and as more stuff comes out in the future, I will then be able to make follow-up videos building on the information that we have discussed today. In much the same way, this video builds on the story of D Machine and Firebase Z, and I have very in-depth videos on both of those maps that I will link in the description and in the top right-hand corner of the screen right now. So if you want a super detailed recap, those are there for you, but I'll give you a 1-minute brief right now. To begin with, Samantha alerted us to the existence of the D Machine facility called Project End Station, located in Morasko, Poland. As Requiem operators, we went in and then basically exfilled at the end when the entire facility started breaking down. We got help from a guy called Orlov. It was all lovely stuff. We then followed Samantha to Firebase Z in Vietnam, where she had been liaising with a new contact called Ravenov. Unfortunately, though, Samantha was captured by Dr. Peck and sent into the Dark Ether, and so we flew in, basically worked against Dr. Peck to prevent his own evil plans, and teamed up with Ravenov to rescue Samantha. Unfortunately, though, time works differently in the Dark Ether, and so even though we acted quickly and got her out in a matter of days, for her, she felt like she'd been in the Dark Ether for months, and that really affected her psyche, gave her amnesia, memory loss, that sort of thing. The map culminated with us saying goodbye to Ravenov because he was going to head to the Ural Mountains for a different mission. He wasn't going to come back home with us, and we took Samantha and returned her to Requiem HQ. Now you're all caught up, we can jump into what we now have learned from Outbreak and the surrounding intel provided in Season 3 and beyond. Let's start off focusing on Samantha. I think it's fair to say that Sam was messed up by the Dark Ether, and she was already kind of messed up in the first place, which is a recipe for disaster. And this manifested in her having kind of violent outbursts against the people around her, so she was taken back to Requiem HQ and pretty much instantly started being pumped full of drugs and sedatives to try and simply get her to calm down. But what this did is it made her feel like Requiem didn't actually trust her, and this was a weird spot for her to be in because she had put her faith in Weaver in going back to Requiem, despite the fact that she wasn't a CIA agent. She wasn't part of Weaver's team. None of that really applied, and yet she sort of took a chance on him and then didn't really feel like the favor was being repaid, and as such, her faith in Weaver started to diminish a little. This will become very relevant a little later in the video. For now, though, I think the last important thing to note on Samantha's front is that she got a dog. It's a Rottweiler, so it's not exactly fluffy, but it's at least part of the way to a replacement. Anyway, while all that was going on, Omega hadn't stopped with their endeavors to basically take over the entire world and win the Cold War. And they were pulling ahead. It wasn't looking good for the West because Omega were really beginning to understand some of the intricacies of how the Dark Ether worked and also who was controlling the zombies and things like that. There was a lot of kind of voodoo stuff that they were getting into that Requiem weren't even really meaningfully aware of. And part of this is what inspired them to work on Operacja Inversia, which is Operation Inversion. The idea is that if there have already been certain outbreak zones with these anomalies spawning in, these portals into the Dark Ether, you would be infinitely more powerful than your opponent if you could spawn in outbreak zones in key territories that they controlled, such as maybe Washington, D.C. or New York, and then also potentially send your own troops through those portals via the Dark Ether so that in a matter of moments, without giving any advanced warning to your enemy, you'd be able to overrun them with forces of the Dark Ether and also overrun them thanks to your soldiers having boots on the ground instantaneously. So it's pretty obvious why this is an attractive proposition for Omega, and they started off testing their ability to create Dark Ether outbreak zones with Outpost 25 in Vietnam. So that explains why Firebase Z happened, like we have a better understanding of that now. They successfully created their first breach, and so with that under their belt, they moved on to weaponizing the process, and the best place for that was the missile battery in Ruka in the Ural Mountains. Specifically, it's Dr. Peck that was assigned to that task, and he was sent down into the missile silo to work on those inversion warheads. While he was doing that, though, something weird happened. He came into contact with someone on the other side of the Dark Ether, and he started to talk to them, and this was actually noticed by Valentina and Gorev, who are Peck's kind of higher-ups, and interestingly, they agreed not to tell the Colonel just yet at that point, because Valentina herself wanted to investigate what Peck was up to, and I suspect what was actually happening there is Valentina wanted more information about what Peck was up to for her own means, and not for the good of the Motherland and the good of Omega Group. She's got her own kind of thing going on that we don't fully understand just yet, but I'm sure more info will come out about that as the days, weeks, and maps go on. Coincidentally, while that was happening, Requiem agents traveled to the Ural Mountains, but not because they knew about Operacja Inversia, but simply because there were outbreak zones there that Ravenov had mentioned and that they also wanted to do a bit of research on if they could. So they had various objectives like escorting a rover that would perform experiments with Dark Dark Ether portals, and also taking down various high-value targets that spawned in from the Dark Ether to try and stop them from doing what they were doing. While they were carrying those tasks out, though, they found a mysterious radio box, and that's where the events of the Outbreak Easter egg began. The signal wasn't fantastic, so they used a couple of nearby amplifiers to boost its signal, and they were surprised to hear that it was Samantha on the other end.
Loyal soldiers of Requiem. Remember me?
Sam provided them with a new beacon listening device to install on the beacon that they had been using to travel around the Ural Mountains. And when they'd done so, she explained a bit more about what was going on.
There you are. There's something you must do. Ravenov is in the field. Find him. I can still trust you, yes? Don't worry. This is a secure frequency used only by the beacon. Requiem won't know anything. Unless you tell them.
Remember earlier when I said that Samantha had started to lose faith in Requiem? Well, here we have an example of that mistrust actually changing Samantha's actions. She decided to talk to our crew in secret rather than going through Weaver, and her next instruction was to find a dead drop left by Ravenov which contained various projector slides that we could use to better understand exactly what Omega were actually doing.
Did Requiem tell you of it? Did Weaver? If they didn't, I am not surprised. For a long time, we didn't know what it was. If it was even real. But Ravenov, he told me he found it.
Move on my waypoint.
This must be it. The missile silo in Ruka. There was truth in the rumors after all. Ravenov heard Omega was developing something called the Reality Inversion Warhead. It is not difficult to decipher their purpose. Imagine being able to open a dark ether breach and create an outbreak zone wherever you wanted. All by firing a missile. The electromagnetic interference generated from the tempests would mean the West could never see it coming. No preemptive response. No mutually assured destruction. The course of history could change overnight. You must travel to Ruka. Find Ravenov. We must try to stop this.
Now that the Requiem operators had learned that information, they had to act on it, and so they traveled to Ruka immediately.
Still in one piece? Good.
They entered the lift that would take them down to the heart of the silo itself, and Samantha radioed in to share some more of her thoughts about what was happening.
If those warheads do what we think, Omega, the Soviets, could destabilize the West. If one of those impacts Washington or New York, it could create an outbreak zone big enough to consume the East Coast. It would throw the West into chaos. It would end the Cold War. But at a terrible cost. We cannot let that happen.
As they stepped out of the lift, a siren went off, locking down the facility, and so they went to override that before they tried to find Ravenov. As soon as they did that, Ravenov appeared.
Lockdown with all personnel return to station.
Requiem! Where is Maxis?
I'm here, still being held by Requiem. They don't want me in the field.
They do not trust you. But we do know what is at stake, yes? Somehow, Peck found a way to supercharge the crystal's power for his warheads. By using those crystalline creatures.
If the warheads at this facility were to detonate, they would trigger an inversion in this reality, creating outbreak zones wherever Omega chooses.
It is no use. I cannot launch the missiles from here. I need you to find the keys. That is the only way we can put an end to Operatia Inversia. Maxis, is there anywhere in particular you want to see destroyed?
This power is too dangerous for either Omega or Requiem to possess. So I say, we dump them in the middle of the Pacific.
Sounds like a plan. Go. Find the launch keys. I will prep the missiles.
When you have secured the keys, we can launch these missiles into the ocean.
Continuing to work without Requiem's direct approval, the operators got started looking for the 3 launch keys that would allow them to launch those nukes into the ocean just like Samantha suggested. It didn't take them long, but once they started the launch sequence, Ravenov let them know that there was a problem above ground.
Alert! Alert! Multiple hit obstructions detected.
Yeah, obstructions? This fucking place. Now what? The hatches were clear when I arrived. Get to the surface and remove the obstructions. We do not wish to immerse half of Russia. Not with us here, at least.
9 minutes to missile launch.
What the hell? Look, at the sky. Maxis, have you ever seen the likes of this?
No, this is different. Those tempests. What are they doing?
Mother of God! Did you know they could do that?
It may be responsible for the obstruction. Kill it. Perhaps that could destroy the crystals that block the hatch.
So not only was there a new enemy in front of the operators called Legion, which was the biggest tempest that they had ever seen to date, but there were also newly formed massive crystal structures on top of the missile silos. So if they tried to launch the nukes, they would just hit the crystals, explode in place, and obviously Requiem's agents would be destroyed, but so would half of Russia. They discovered, though, that by taking down this massive tempest, they could also destroy the crystals.
Like true Russians, you fight with heart and mind. If you destroy the orb, destroy it.
That is one of them. A start, but still 2 more to go.
After a hard-fought battle, they succeeded.
The crystals are destroyed. Hoorah! Hatches clear for missile launch.
Good. Send these missiles to the bottom of the ocean. No one should possess such power.
The Ethereum supercharged Operatia Inversia rockets were sent into the ocean, and Maxis, who was still back in Requiem HQ, alerted Requiem as to what had happened so that Raptor 1 would be sent in to pick the operators up.
So, according to Agent Maxis, y'all need a ride out of here. I reckon Weaver's pretty pissed at her going behind his back and all, but there weren't no way I was gonna leave y'all hanging.
They successfully exfilled from the region and would probably return to continue more experiments later, but that's where we are to date in the story. There is one wrinkle to this that was suggested to me by Incredilag, and I think it's a really, really cool idea. In Warzone, we had zombies introduced, and it was a bit weird because zombies being in the Warzone story was just kind of a surprise, but they arrived on a boat called the Vodianoi. This boat had left Rebirth Island in 1984, but then it turned up in Verdansk 37 years later, and despite that time difference, the crew that left on the ship were the same people that arrived all those years later. They didn't run out of food, they didn't run out of fuel or power or anything like that. They just seemed to travel through time. And it's not been clear exactly what caused that, but now, based on what Incredilag suggested to me here, I think that there's a real possibility that these inversion nukes were sent into the ocean, caused some kind of outbreak zone or outbreak portal, and then the Rebirth ship traveled through it unwittingly unwittingly and ended up in the future, and that would explain the weird discrepancy going from 1984 all the way to the future Verdansk, not 1980s Verdansk. There are a few issues with this theory though, one being that if they'd entered the Dark Ether, the crew would have felt like they had been in the Dark Ether for like hundreds of years, because we know that time travels slower in the Dark Ether. So Samantha, 3 real-world days was several real-world months, and so presumably several real-world years would be multiple decades or even hundreds of years inside the Dark Ether. Also, it seems like the focus of the Vodyanoi stuff so far has been the cargo that was on board, as opposed to them traveling into a nuke zone or just anything even remotely close to that. So it's not really a watertight theory, but it's a really interesting idea, and I think that it's sort of equally likely that Treyarch could either be using this as the explanation, or they could just be relying on the fact that the boat had Nova 6 stuff on board. Maybe there was just a portal because of the Nova 6 or something, or maybe they were literally just adrift for 37 years and then they just ended up in Verdansk. I'm sure we'll get more clarity on this though soon. It's just a nice, interesting theory that I wanted to leave you with here. So what's next? Well, Valentina has her own motives going on with some outside party not as part of Omega Group, so she's probably going to defect at some point. Peck is talking to someone in the Dark Ether that we don't know the identity of. Kravchenko seems to have much bigger plans for Omega Group than Valentina originally proposed. And the zombies themselves are also forming their own army, which seem to be being controlled by a mysterious force that we don't know the identity of, but that has been referred to as the One. Then on Requiem's side, the director of Requiem is also causing some suspicion to arise. And Samantha has lost faith in Requiem and now betrayed them essentially by sending Requiem operators into this mission without Weaver's approval. And so the story is really in a precarious place. No one really trusts anyone else. Everyone is betraying everyone else that they possibly can. And the next few things that happen in the story are no doubt going to have massive consequences. We know that there is a new Outbreak Easter egg on the way in Season 4, and what I think is going to happen there is we are going to work to extract various Omega scientists that are looking to defect from the Omega Group and join Requiem, which we know, by the way, because they contacted Ravenov and Ravenov told Weaver. But I think we're going to get double-crossed. And the reason for this is that I think that Valentina has set up those scientists to pretend to defect. And she's done that because she knows that the captain, Ravenov, is in contact with Requiem. And so she's basically baiting us with those scientists. And then she's going to pull the rug out from under us. And in the same way that Firebase Z was kind of Peck's map, where we learned a load about him, I think that the Outbreak Easter egg will be a rug pull of us extracting those scientists. And then in the next round-based map coming in Season 4, we'll then get a map that's focused on Valentina, her plans, her subterfuge, and all that sort of thing. That's just a theory though for now. If you want to find out what actually happens, then I'll have links in the description and on screen right now that you can click, linking to the videos that I'll make for those maps and those Easter eggs as soon as they release. I hope this video has been entertaining. Make sure to drop a like if it has been, and I'll hopefully see you next time if you've subscribed. See you then. Bye for now.